Once you have read and annotated each article, the next step then is to complete a summary analysis. And we practiced this last semester, and if you'll recall, you saw a chart that looks something like this. At the top, you always had to fill in who the author was, what genre what the reading material was actually written in, whether that be an article, a short story, an essay, a poem, etc. The title of the piece that you read. If you know the date that the article or the essay, whatever it is that you're reading, was actually written in, to include that. Then you were to think about the rhetorical verb. And this was a struggle for several of you, and it probably will continue to be until we've practiced a few more times. The rhetorical verb really is, what is the author doing in the piece? I do not want you to say the article is about, or Mr. Smith's article is about. It needs to have a rhetorical verb like the three that you see here. Argues, claims, suggests, and there are numerous other verbs that you can use, including explains, describes, explicates, any of those other verbs, but you need to stay away from is about. Once you did that, then you were pulling the main idea of the text, and this main idea really just illustrates your understanding of the text. Did you fully comprehend what the text was truly about? Did you see what the main idea, the main message was? And by pulling that information out, you're being able to illustrate that to me. Then you're to list the key points that the author makes to support his or her claim, and that will just support your understanding of the main idea. The next thing that we did just a little bit of last semester, and we'll really practice more this semester, is to think about how did the author actually develop the article. How did he or she write the argument so that you understood it fully, or so that they conveyed their ideas about the topic in such a way that you know it's an argument or a description or a suggestion. I want you to think about the strategies that the author used, the devices that the author used, and then how it was actually organized. How was the text organized? And we're going to break these three down further as we move through the next few weeks. What strategies can an author use, what devices, and what organization can an author use? And then finally, what is the author's purpose? Why did the author write this? Why did the author choose to publish this? What's the purpose in doing that? Last semester, you had to complete this graphic organizer before you actually got to the written part of the summary analysis. Please note, you do not have to complete a chart like this in order to get to this point. We've already practiced that. It's something that you should be familiar with. This will be linked to our website, so if you need to go back and figure out what needs to be in a summary analysis, it will be there for you, but you do not have to complete the graphic organizer unless you find that of benefit. After you read the text and you've annotated the text, then you will open Google Docs. You will open a new page that you have in your collections folder for this class, and you will write your summary analysis first. Your summary analysis should be quite lengthy, and when you're typing it, you're going to see that it really does look much more lengthy than you're used to writing at this point, and there's a reason for that. In order to really be in depth in your analysis and your summarizing, you need to write more information than what you've been used to. Let's break this down really quickly. I'm going to read through parts of it and then stop and show you what you should be thinking about as you write your own summary analysis. In his article, Don't Blame the Eater, David Zinczenko argues that children who eat at fast food restaurants like McDonald's, should not be personally blamed for their weight gain, and that, in fact, they should have the right to launch lawsuits against the fast food industry for making them fat. I'm going to stop right here. What I want you to notice is when you're responding to an article or an essay or a short piece, you will always use quotation marks to set that off. Books are underlined, movie titles are underlined, but essays, articles, short stories, and poems will be punctuated with these. And these are your quotation marks. Okay. The next thing I want you to notice is that you will use the author's full name, first name and last name, and then later you'll see that it's just the last name that's used. That's really important to note. The first time you always use first and last, and then after that point you just use the last name. It'll make your life a little bit easier, not having to type two things out. And it's more formal. You never want to use their first name. You're not on a first name basis with them. You only use first names for people that you're in a really good relationship with, and an author that you're summarizing and analyzing is not that relationship. The next thing I want you to notice is there is that verb, and that verb will be something other than is about. It needs to be argues, describes, explains. What is the author actually doing? And then you'll see the main idea of the text, including a quote. And this little piece right here is the page number from where we can find that quote. And we'll talk a little bit more about that this semester as well. Remember that anytime you pull somebody else's text from their writing, anytime that you borrow somebody else's words, you must use quotation marks. You cannot take other people's language and claim it to be yours. That is plagiarism, and we do not want you to get in trouble for plagiarism. It's a quick fix to not plagiarize simply by giving the author credit for their own words and then citing that material. And I'll show you how to do this a little bit more this semester. Zinczenko states that it's easier to find a McDonald's than it is to find a place to buy a grapefruit. In addition, he claims that even if consumers have access to the calorie information, it can be hard to understand. What I want you to remember is when you're writing that summary analysis, you not only have the title of the article, the author's name, that rhetorical verb that you've chosen, the main idea, but you also have text that you use to support that main idea. So remember, you're listing key points. They can be quotations or examples that illustrate or support the author's claim. What does the author use? Then the next thing, Zinczenko begins his piece with a more humorous slant than what he ends with. He begins with an idea that blaming the eater for being fat is nearly as ludicrous as blaming Porsche for speeding tickets. However, he quickly moves from the comedic value of blaming the eater to his own personal experience of growing up into a torpid teenage tallow, stating that as a latchkey kid of the 1980s, his only choices for lunch and dinner were places like Pizza Hut and McDonald's. At this point, we're beginning to analyze how was the article actually written. If you remember, how does the author develop? We're thinking about the ways that the author actually develops the article, and this is how he begins, and this is the direction he goes. In addition, he cites numerous statistics that literature that illustrate diabetes has increased since 1994, a fact that he connects with eating fast food. And then finally, he notes that caloric information is misleading. And more information directly from the text is listed here, but he's talking about statistics now. He's moved from a humorous slant to his personal experience to giving statistics, and that logos, if you remember from previous classes, those statistics that support his argument. And then finally, we get to the last piece of the summary analysis. I think the author's purpose for writing this article is to make people stop and think about how fast food chains are a major cause in making people fat. That's the last piece in the summary analysis. So let's review summary analysis, author, the genre, the title, the date if you know the date that it was published, rhetorical verb, argues, claims, suggests, what's the main idea of the text, listing the key points that support that main idea, and they can be quotations or examples from the text. Remember, we always give credit to another author's words. They've spent a lot of time writing, they are published, they need respect for what they have completed. We must give them that. How does the author develop? We think about the strategies, the devices, how it was organized, and then finally the purpose. So in your summary analysis, each one of those pieces will unfold in one paragraph. The last thing that I want to see in your summary analysis will be then the conversion or the step over point into what you believe. And so I want you to think about what you believe about this article. We read it earlier this year and you responded to it. The next piece really is, how do you connect? What's your opinion? Do you agree or do you disagree? Even though Zinczenko's argument is well formulated, I do not agree with his argument that the eater is not to blame. You have a statement here that will then lead us into the rest of your response. The rest of your response will support why you don't agree with his point, and you'll use textual support. Whichever article you are reading today, you need to realize that you are walking through the same summary analysis that we did last semester. You do not have to fill out the form before you type your analysis, but you do need to refresh your memory occasionally, and you will have this video, and you will also have the actual handout linked to our website. Please feel free to look at it, watch the video whenever you need.